and sort of connected with the loving kindness meditation, which we did at the end of our practice just now, comes the whole idea of, well, dealing with emotions which make it hard for us to be a forgiving person. Many religious traditions have a lot of emphasis on forgiveness. Buddhism is amongst them. The whole thing about negative emotions is that they do add to the baggage, and especially if we hope to make strides in meditation, then it's a baggage that tends to hold us back quite a lot. So look at forgiveness and see what we can learn about it. Of course, there are many ways of perspectives on forgiveness, even from our own point of view. And we can think of ourselves on being at the receiving end of forgiveness from other people. Maybe how that feels. You know, if it was us, then generally we would feel better if someone was able to forgive us, right? The perspective is being able to forgive ourselves. Some people who have this sort of death wish to beat themselves up repeatedly about things they have regrets about in their past. It seems like a sort of masochism in some senses. And then there's forgiving other people, us as the person forgiving others around us who maybe hurt us or harmed us in the past. There's three perspectives you can look at forgiveness from. And there's this Canadian poet who once wrote that there are sort of levels of maturity in forgiveness as well. As a child, it takes a while to realize that people are not all perfect, especially like adults and your parents and people. So if you still haven't realized that, then you're still a child. You start to grow up to be an adolescent when you can forgive them some of their imperfections. Then moving from an adolescent to becoming an adult, you maybe are able to forgive yourself as well, the imperfections that you have, and go beyond them, hopefully. And somehow the ability to forgive yourself is something that helps you to become wise. So there's a Canadian for you. So some reasons why forgiving or being a forgiving person is actually some sort of advantage to you. The first of these is you have to remember that when you forgive others, it's actually for your own benefit and not for the benefit of the person you're forgiving. If you don't lose sight of that, then it's quite helpful to you. If you think of yourself lying awake at night, burning with fury about how you've been wronged, you're the one who's losing sleep, not the person who you're so angry about, who's normally sleeping very well, thank you. So, like, who's the person who's suffering here? Secondly, the thing not to lose sight of is forgiving people doesn't mean condoning what they've done. And it may not mean forgetting what they've done. Because part of the being wise is, well, storing away information so that once you start to learn what are people's shortcomings, like the sort of thing that leads you to be hurt, then you don't leave yourself open to that so easily next time round, because there's a learning process. But as for the forgiving side, yeah, it's important to make a separation between people and what people do. So this ability to say, well, look, I like you as a person, but I don't like some of the things you do. So I forgive you as a person, but the behavior, like, I don't want to see it again. Yeah, but I can still, like, be your friend, okay? But it's just like, I'm not going to let you do that again. Goodness is helpful in that it helps us turn the corner of a feeling of helplessness, allowing you to reclaim the power over your own life and well-being. So the victim can stop being a victim by letting go of that, because then they can move past it. But for as long as you are unable to forgive, then it's like you haven't actually released yourself from that whole situation. There are difficult emotions involved with being able to forgive someone, which may include things like blaming and anger and grief. Forgiveness doesn't mean that you suppress those, or deny them, or minimize them, but it allows you that process of sort of shedding those to make progress. Otherwise it's like bottled up inside you. The anger and resentment when you are unable to forgive people, of course it's toxic to yourself. It may give you stomach ulcers and lots of other nasty things. But what you may not have considered is actually toxic to the people around you as well. And for as long as you're hanging on to those sort of negative feelings, it somehow affects the people around you in the same way. Maybe not the people who have actually wronged you as well. It might be your children, it may be your family. They actually end up suffering with you for as long as you are unable to let go of that. Hear about these usually Chinese sort of family feuds where they are avenging things that happened 7 generations ago. You can imagine how long that sort of sense of negativity has affected a whole family until it's almost become who they are, you know. If they can't be anything more than that, well, it's slightly worrying. Research shows non-forgiveness in families leads children to be exposed to ongoing conflict and or being placed in the middle of it. So it's often the children who suffer. They're really the innocents in the whole process. Yeah, it's sad. And the thing that we might sort of justify not forgiving people is this sort of sense that somehow we're going to have pleasure in getting even. But even if you do get even, and sometimes it doesn't ever happen, it's usually short-lived. Yeah, you get this sort of to punch the air or something. Yeah, got their own back. With like, okay, like you're happy for like 2 minutes or something. And then what? You know, you still got the rest of your life to deal with. So yeah, it's slightly overrated. In Buddhism, you be aware there are different sort of denominations and traditions, even within Buddhism, different views relating to forgiveness, but most of them seem to point in the same direction. Technically speaking, it's known as Gamana Sila or Titika. It's a willingness to let go of anger, resentment or vengefulness that we have towards those who have injured us or those we love. Sometimes forgiveness is even defined as a form of generosity, giving people a chance or another chance. The Buddha once said that when a disciple confessed their fault to the Buddha, he would usually reply, truly a fault has overcome you, but since you have acknowledged the fault and confessed it, as is proper, I forgive it. For anyone who acknowledges a fault and confesses it will develop restraint in the future and grow in the noble discipline. So confession is seen as one way in which one can move past some sort of wrongdoing, either on our behalf or someone else's behalf. But there's a sense in which just acknowledging something somehow gives us a power over it. And a person is seen as being wiser instead of hiding something away, but acknowledging it publicly and moving past it makes you the stronger person. Gives you the upper hand in that sense. And the Buddha also said that by three things a wise person can be known: seeing a fault as it is, on seeing it tries to correct it, and when another acknowledges the fault, he forgives it as he should. So let's say someone else has messed up, they've hurt you, but once you see that person trying to make amends somehow, let them do that. Don't sort of say, well, we're not going to let them sort of move past that themselves. That's seen, the opposite of wise is generally sort of dumb. So it will be seen as a dumb thing not to let them do that. Saying that, often there's this thing about giving people 3 chances. If you come across that before, it's not like, okay, here we go again, they've done it wrong again, and we're going to forgive them again. How many times do you have to do that? Sometimes you give them 3 chances, like things like lending them money, for example. You not sort of come back a 4th time, they're still wanting to borrow money from you when they haven't ever returned anything they borrowed from you. Yeah, maybe give them 3 chances, and that's sort of known as Buddhist pragmatism. Doesn't mean you hate them, but it means that you don't lend the money anymore. You like this person, you love them, but you don't like their behavior. So it's the forgiving the person, but not the behavior. There's a nice story about a monk living in a little shack somewhere. And one day, as the monk was doing sort of monkish things, late at night, studying or whatever, at some stage he noticed this guy climbing through his window and helping himself to his meager valuables. So, having availed himself of all the meager valuables, this sort of ruffian was about to climb back out the window again, going away with all the monk's valuables. Monks don't have that much in the first place, and this guy was taking all of it. And the monk said, "Hang on a moment, it looks like you're taking all my valuables out the window." And the robber said, "You have a problem with that?" And the monk said, "Well, generally if you get something from someone else, it's polite to say thank you." So the ruffian said, "Well, thank you," and then climbed out the window with all the valuables, and the monk didn't see him again for some time. And later on, the police were making some inquiries, because it turned out quite a lot of people had had this guy climb through their window and take all their valuables. And it turned out that amongst the possessions which this guy was caught with eventually were some of the stuff from a monk's shack. And so they called in the monk to sort of testify against the guy in court. And they said, "Do you recognize this guy? He is a known robber." And the monk said, "No, I don't think I recognize him as a robber, because when he stole my stuff, he said thank you." And the police said, "Oh, well, in that case, if you sort of let him have that stuff, then that's a completely different story. So the guy was released from suspicion. And the robber was so relieved that he immediately signed up to become a student of this monk, and later on became quite a good practitioner himself. So by the monk having this sense of forgiveness, great things actually came about from what started out as not a very good situation. Yeah? So forgiveness can be positive. This is a sort of Buddhist story. But it's not easy to be a forgiving person. It takes effort. It takes less effort to forgive people you like. In fact, you can say that there's a sort of biological instinct to sort of forgive people we like. Yeah, it's not too hard. But beyond forgiving people we like, to like people we feel sort of indifferent about, or maybe people we don't like that much at all, then it needs a special effort. It's not that it can't be done, but it doesn't take some sort of intention and maybe even training to be able to manage to do that. And you could say that what we just did with spreading loving kindness, it is a way in which we can learn to do what is quite difficult, which is to extend that sense of forgiveness and love and loving kindness, all that good stuff, towards those for whom it doesn't come naturally. But it's something you can train yourself to do. There's another way of doing loving kindness, which you may not have tried, which is to start with people you love, spread loving kindness to all those lovely people, and then you picture all the people who you don't love too much. Maybe it's just have a sort of slight sort of attraction towards. You spread loving kindness to them. And having succeeded in that, you then move to people who are like you feel nothing towards, like neutral, strangers. Yeah? Spread loving kindness to all them. And then you get to people who you feel sort of a mild dislike of. So you picture all those people who you have a mild dislike of them, and you spread loving kindness towards them. And then you come to these people who you downright hate, and you picture all them, and then you spread loving kindness to all of those. And usually by this time it becomes quite difficult. In fact, you may have sort of failed at an earlier stage, but with practice it tends to come more easily. Yeah. But generally, just spreading it in wider and wider circles is an easier way to do it, and in some sense it will help you undermine that anger. You start with a small situation when you are thinking about training yourself in forgiveness. Sometimes people have this sense of not wanting to forgive because it actually makes their life harder. If a person can sort of hang on to this sort of being wronged by some other person, maybe since their childhood or something, it allows them to blame everything on that and on that other person. And what they then get to do is never to take responsibility for their life at all, because they can blame everything that went wrong in their life on that certain small situation that happened a long, long time ago. Actually, it takes a much braver person to have to face up to taking responsibility for their life and not putting the blame on other people. So there's this thing about pointing the finger at other people, but you've got another 4 fingers pointing back at you. Buddhism generally tends to take be of the opinion that these 4 fingers pointing back at you are usually a much easier way to rectify the situation than trying to change another person. Anyone of you who has experience of marriage and has been trying for many years to change their loved one into the sort of person they want them to be, you probably realize at a certain point that it's easier just to sort of adapt yourself to fit in with them. And that's always the case. It's much easier to change yourself than it is to change the people around you. So when we know that this is the case, even though the way you've been wronged may be entirely genuine, but the way to grow as a person is to move past it, to take as much responsibility for your life as you possibly can. Steps that you can make towards forgiveness if you are thinking of a particular situation which you find difficult is firstly to consider that if you can forgive them, it opens up your heart in the face of injustice, betrayal or harm. Not necessarily in a vulnerable way, but in a way that makes you stronger. Secondly, don't forget that everyone would like to be forgiven if they have the chance at that. It's something you can do for other people. It's a gift. And don't think it's going to happen all at once. Some people feel that if they forgive them today, then sort of all the problems will just sort of evaporate overnight. It's not the case. There's a working through process which will then ensue. But if you don't start, then you don't finish. And the steps that tend to come from that are, firstly, there's the willingness to let go, first of all, of that personal suffering. And then you become mindfully present to notice any unfinished business of the heart that still needs forgiving. But you don't tend to get to see that until you've made that first step. There may be a sense of honest grieving over harm experienced as you cultivate the willingness to practice forgiveness. And you work through those emotions layer by layer, just like you would do with grieving. And practice of loving kindness, as we did at the very end of our meditation just now, whether you do it from the point of view of expanding it just generally towards living beings, or whether you work from the liked people to the disliked ones, it's a vital way in which you can make a difference to the way you feel. There is at some point where the anger you felt somehow evaporates, or is undermined, somehow it doesn't have power over you anymore. It's quite dramatic how that can happen, especially if it's been something that's been with you for a long time already, that sort of grudge or whatever. Notice at some stage it doesn't have sway over you anymore. We talk more about anger this evening. It's something that's slated up for the evening talk. That's another sort of way of looking at it. Forgiveness is the means to overcome it in some sense, but the anger is what you feel. We'll talk about that more this evening. One final quote from the Dalai Lama is that he said, he forgives, but he doesn't forget. So there's a learning process. I think he manages to forgive everybody, but he probably stores away quite a lot of things in his memory to avoid similar situations occurring in the future. Would you like to ask anything? Yes, go ahead, Raina. Belief in anger. Yes, nipping it in the bud, I think it's the title. That's this evening. Yeah, it wasn't on the menu because it is, it's a, what do you call it? A required subject for this retreat. Yeah, because there might be some other people joining us too, just for this evening. I think they got a video or something. They'll probably not keep it to themselves. But the best thing is to remember it. Then when you are in this position where you need to forgive people, you can think, ah, yes, I remember that one. Yeah, just stretching. It's a bit like classroom, isn't it? Yes, go on. Yes, I think so. I think this is probably one of the main things that helped me see the value of meditating, was that I used to be quite a fractious person, who spent quite a lot of the time annoyed by things, and learning to step back from that was something which I only started to do when I had taken up meditation. So I've become a different person as a result of meditating. And I think that was one of the things that made me see the value of meditating, that it did release me from that. Otherwise, I think I would have not been a particularly nice person to know. Yeah.
Person A harms person B, and person A admits fault.
The person B has harmed them, right? Harmed person B. Okay, yeah. Yes.
Still, harm. And how does person A go about forgiving herself when the harm is still there?
Well, I think the Buddhist way of looking at things is there's the harm, and then there's the feelings surrounding the harm. Let's say they've done something that can't be restituted. So, let's give an example. They ran over your dog. So, no matter how forgiving you might feel, they're not going to bring the dog back. Or even if they get you a new dog, then it might not look the same as the last one. But the feelings you have, they are eating you up inside, whether you have a dog or not. But if you're able to forgive that person and move past it, dog or no dog, you feel happier as a person. And I think that's the argument I'm trying to make, is that in itself is worth forgiving the person for. And you'd be silly not to forgive the person if you want to carry around that thing, given that it's not going to bring your dog back one way or the other. Oh, forgiving yourself.
I ran over your dog.
Yeah, well, there's this thing about turning over a new leaf in a way that helps you to avoid making the same mistakes repeatedly. And yeah, you need to move past it, I think. It's part of accepting that we are not perfect as individuals, and going beyond it and strengthening ourselves as a result. Our whole past is filled with mistakes. no matter how great we are now, but we had to make lots of mistakes to get here. So it's better to look at ourselves as someone who has somehow moved past that. And guilt is not seen as a constructive emotion. But how do you turn guilt around into something where you've learned something and you can, build on that? The guilt itself is not seen as constructive at all. Having a conscience is a good thing, but one tries to, not dwell on things in our past which we're not proud of, but we try to make our future better than that. So the good place to put the energy in, from our point of view, is to, go and open an animal hospital or something, on the basis of your earnest intent to do better next time. That would be a better way to use that energy, instead of just dwelling on it and beating yourself up. Yeah. Buddhism is a great religion for turning over a new leaf. Usually you have New Year's resolutions and that sort of thing. Thai people have got New Year 4 times a year, because they love to make a new start and look forward and don't look back and dwell on the past. And there's a sort of pragmatic sort of sense in that, without sort of just trashing everything and sort of forgetting about it, but constant sense of improvement and moving beyond that. But if in doubt, and you get these people who keep running over your dog, you give them three chances. Yeah. Oh, well, there's a Western New Year, there's Chinese New Year, then there's Thai New Year, which is April, usually 13th, and then you got Songkran, which Loi Krathong, which is sort of Indian New Year, where they put those candle lanterns and float away all their regrets with the candle lantern in the river. Yeah, and then later someone can pick up all the litter out of the river. Yeah, yeah. So 4 times a year. Yeah. It's not obvious how meditation can possibly help, but there is something in this loving kindness meditation which is very powerful. And even though you might believe that you could never forgive a person for something which you feel very strongly about, if you do loving kindness meditation long enough or regularly enough, you find something changes in you. And give an example, this is really an example of anger. There's this guy who suffered from road rage. He's quite a big guy, he's with a lot of tattoos and stuff. He looked like the sort of person you wouldn't want to mess with. And his habit was, if anyone ever sort of passed him, overtook him in the car, then he must go faster and overtake that person again. So he must always be in front of the person who was going faster. And it just became automatically what he always did. Got angry, and then he came for meditation, and at a certain stage this guy went past him in the car, and he thought, well, so what? And he thought, well, that's strange. I normally don't think like that. Something's changed in me. And the person sitting in the passenger seat said, you going to let them get away with that? He says, well, I think I am. So I'm not the person I used to be anymore. And he came back and he sort of confessed this in the meditation class, and everyone was sort of looking at him, wow, he's a changed guy. But something, it's like, when it changes, it doesn't change back again. It's gone. Once it's gone for good. And this is the sort of thing that gives you some sort of, faith, I guess, that all this effort I'm doing with meditation is actually worth it, because things change and you don't go back to what you were before. Once it's gone for good. So it is quite encouraging. And with anger, well, personally, I think that was very much more obvious than in maybe other aspects of like one's personal imperfections. So I recommend loving kindness meditation. Yes, Ryan.
You learn early on that anger is really a negative thing. But is that always a bad negative thing? Because I know people who, because they got so angry at somebody, they, for example, became rich. Like that, whatever somebody said or how they were put down, it motivated them to become really incredible.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk more about anger this evening, but anger is fairly toxic too. And there's a sense in which, especially any of you who are teachers, you know that by pretending to be angry, you can also achieve many of those things as well, without actually being angry. You just pretend you're angry. You put on this act, and normally children are quite easily convinced, so that you don't get all this sort of like losing it, and sort of the stomach ulcers and that sort of thing. You just sort of put on this act of speak really loudly, and children sort of take you seriously then. Yeah. So sometimes it's just this question of being taken seriously. Losing it doesn't necessarily make that more convincing. And there's this thing about like justified anger and that sort of thing, and having the full range of emotional sort of reactions to things, which sometimes you hear complimented in the media. There are ways to make a point without being angry, and I don't think anger ever really helps anything too much. Anyway, we have come to 11 o'clock. As you may know, monks may be flexible in many things, but lunchtimes is not negotiable. And I don't know if you heard, there's a whole bunch of Thai people coming who are coming to, I think, give... a group photo? Now? Oh, now, okay. With the monk or not? Oh, okay. So we have to quickly get the group photo before all these Thai people come and take over. Yeah. Yeah, there's Thai people who are going around and giving a donation at 9 temples. It makes it luckier. So we are one of the 9, so they're all going to turn up and make a donation. Yeah, with a whole busload of them. Yeah, so please try and keep your mind calm and collected, and not be perturbed by all these enthusiastic Thai people rushing to the next one of the 9 temples after they've been here.